Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the to the work session meeting tonight. I guess first up we'll have Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So just a brief announcement. We did have an executive session this evening, started at 6 o'clock and went on to 7:30 to discuss matters of personnel. Moving on, we are going to have several proclamations this evening. First off, I think we'll be starting with Latin, right?
That is correct. We are pleased this evening to recognize students for their accomplishment in the 2018 National Latin Exam. To do the presentation this evening, we have Jonathan Rocky, the North Penn High School Latin teacher.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jonathan Rocky. I am the Latin teacher at North Penn High School. Before we begin, I want to thank all the parents for making these Latin scholars possible. To the students for being here. Some of them are seniors and don't owe me anything. Others are underclassmen who are giving up an hour of studying for whatever exam is tomorrow. And thank you to the board for this opportunity to recognize our students' achievements. Aside from being the high point of the social calendar of every North Penn High School Latin student, the National Latin Exam is a nationally recognized measure of what students know about Latin. It covers a gamut of related subjects, including history and mythology and grammar and vocabulary and just about anything else one would need or want to know. So suffice it to say that a student that does well on this exam knows something worth knowing. These are the students who achieved gold or silver in this year's National Latin Exam. That, according to my best calculations, puts them in the top 18 or 10% nationally. So here we go. Jacob Hillman, Andrew Ramirez, Emily Wiley was unable to be here tonight, Isaac Lambert, Pooja Samant, Leah Miles, Rachel Allmark, Hannah Sweeney and Tony Shu could not be here tonight, Adam Luby, Kyle Procopio, Kendall Kohout, Abigail Broadhead was not able to be here tonight, but Abigail Boquist is. Piero Barantes and Kelly Dwyer were unable to be here tonight. Nabila Yasmin, Benjamin Allmark, who this year got his 5th gold in a row in his high school career. Tristan Misko, Erin Spross, Anoop Bhatt with his 4th gold this year. William Marshall was unable to attend tonight. John Pham also with his 4th gold. Yik-Young Kim, Evan Jones with his fourth gold this year. Emily Liu. Lucas Morley could not be here tonight. Ethan Baker. Zechariah Bridgers could not be here tonight. Yejun Lee. Adam Greenberg. And 3 other students that could not attend, Vian Chang, Abigail Parrott, and Casey Yin. So these are this year's North Penn High School National Latin Exam Gold and Silver Award winners.
Would you mind all coming around and so we can all shake your hands? Thank you, Mr. Rocky. Thank you, Mr. Rocky.
As always,
Thanks.
thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Congratulations.
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 Again, congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations again. Again, congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations again.
Congratulations.
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 Again, congratulations.
Congratulations, Daddy.
Congratulations
Congratulations,
again.
Congratulations.
Again, congratulations.
Congratulations, Aaron.
Congratulations again. Again, congratulations. Congratulations again. Again, congratulations. Congratulations again.
Congratulations.
Again,
Congratulations.
Congratulations again.
Congratulations.
Again, congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations again.
So can we have another hand for the Latin students, please? We'll just take a minute till the next group of students comes in. The next group will be North Penn High School Theater Director and the theater kids. Lesbian troupe. On down to twice. All right. Also, I just want to make an announcement that this school board meeting will be aired on Comcast Cable, Channel 28, and Verizon Fios, Channel 29, on the following dates: Wednesday, June 13th at 7:30 p.m., Thursday, June 14th at 12:30 and 7:30, Friday, June 15th at 12:30 and 7:30, and then again on Monday at June 18th at 12:30 if you want to see a rerun. Thank you.
Okay, this evening we do have Andrew Rooney, the North Penn High School Theater Director, here to introduce our students from North Penn High School Thespian Troupe 5464 for all of their accomplishments. So, Andrew?
We're delighted to be here tonight. Thank you so much for recognizing these students, for recognizing all these wonderful students, talking to them out in the lobby and all these amazing, eclectic things that they're all doing. It's just terrific. We have brought tonight members of our outgoing officers in cabinet from Thespian Troupe 5464. Some of them were not able to be here tonight because of graduation, and I believe they're in New Jersey. And others have jobs or various things, and a couple are in shows at community theaters, so they couldn't be here this evening. Before we begin tonight, I would just like to say we've had a terrific year. These students, once again, have represented North Penn High School at the Pennsylvania State Thespian Conference, have gone to, have done various leadership activities around the building, including continuing the Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS fundraising, and it's been, once again, just a wonderful year. And even as we're here tonight, I'm sort of going to take a moment to announce that for many years, graduates from North Penn High School Theater who studied under Cindy Loudon, who had this program for 40 years, have gone on to Broadway and various things. But tonight, at 7 o'clock, my first student, Sky Lakota Lynch, opened in Dear Evan Hansen tonight on Broadway. And he's the first replacement in that show. Yes. We're extraordinarily excited about that, and he's also been picked up by Disney, and it looks like he's going to be a Marvel villain sometime in December on Netflix as well. So from Evan Hansen to a Marvel villain, it's very exciting. And continuing in Sky's tradition, we have a number of students here tonight. Our president could not be here tonight, Mara Slater, who also won a senior scholarship for talent at our Pennsylvania State Thespian Conference at Central York High School back in December. Our first vice president, Allison Graff, also, I believe, is working this evening, could not be here with us. But we have our other vice president, Stephen Kadikian, to represent us. Even though he graduated, he is back. Stephen also did an individual event, duet music competition at the Thespian Conference. And he and his partner, Maddie Burke, won a superior score in that, which is the highest score you can win. Our next person is Molly Hofstetter. And Molly was our recording secretary this year, keeping all of the points in order and taking all of our minutes and things. And she too also performed a solo musical individual event at the Pennsylvania State Conference and also won a superlative in that event. Now we have Katie Kreis, and Katie Kreis was our recording secretary. Corresponding secretary, sending out all the notices for meetings and keeping communication going. We also have Andrew Bazzelli, who could not be with us tonight. He was our treasurer, and you would have recognized him as Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. Jay Patel was our historian. He could also not be with us here tonight. Emily Boyles was our first of our co-coordinators for Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, and she could not be here tonight. But her partner, Emma Steersman, who was the other coordinator for the Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS events throughout the year, is here this evening. We also have Melina Clarka, who was one of our fundraising activity people this year, along with Ben Varghese, who also could not be here this evening. Madeline Burke was Stephen's partner at States, winning the Superior in the duet musical number, but she's rehearsing at Dutch Country Playhouse tonight for Little Women. Sammy Steck was one of our outreach coordinators, and that was the first year that we did that position, reaching out to the middle schools and their theater students and going down and talking with them and reaching out and helping them at various times. Josie Gennardi was also on our thespian board, and she cannot be here with us tonight. And Jamin Crosby was our sophomore representative, and he's unable to be here tonight because he has a concussion. But he sent his best to all of you and his sincere thank yous. So those were members of our board, and the other reason you are honored them tonight is they were once again a gold honor troupe recognized by Pennsylvania State Thespian Chapter for superior and outstanding work in performance, in community outreach, in fundraising, in participation at the Thespian Festival, at the International Festival level, and for also doing social work, which would be the Broadway Cares. So thank you very much for honoring us this evening.
Thank you.
Stephen, you want to lead them around here?
Yeah. And Mrs. Rooney, if you'd like to follow behind them.
I will.
Thank you. Good luck with all your.
Thank you. Congratulations to you. Okay.
Congratulations.
Okay,
Congratulations. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Can we have another round of applause for the thespian troupe? Thank you.
Perfect. How are you doing?
Okay, so next up will be the North Penn High School English for the National Council of Teachers of English Annual Achievement in Writing Contest.
Good evening. My name is Ellen McKee, and this is my colleague Sarah Lewandowski. Together with Janet Kratz, we teach AP English, Language and Composition, junior year at North Penn High School. Each year, the National Council of Teachers of English, sort of our homeboys, the NCTE, holds a writing contest for high school juniors in the United States, Canada, the Virgin Islands, and American schools abroad. Contestants are asked to submit a sample of his or her best work in poetry, narrative, argument, expository writing, and also they have to write a themed writing. The themed writing is a written response to a prompt that the NCTE provides each year. This year's prompt title, Changing the Narrative, tasked the entrants to create a writing in response to an essay by Sandra Day O'Connor, the first female justice on the Supreme Court, who had famously noted, quote, "We don't accomplish anything in this world alone, and whatever happens is the result of the whole tapestry of one's life and all the weavings of individual threads from one to another that create something."
Out of all of the entries this year, 226 were deemed superior. Of those 226, 4 were from North Penn High School, a testament to the quality of writing instruction, K through 12, and student talent of our school community. The 4 superior writers of this year's junior class are Connie Jang, Yukyung Kim, Karis Ma, who could not be here tonight, and Abby Worthington.
Can we have a round of applause? Ms. Landowski and Mrs. McKee, if you wouldn't mind walking through with your students so everybody can congratulate you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Congratulations again.
Thank you. Have a good summer.
Congratulations. Congratulations again.
Another round of applause for the. Oh. Mrs. Kratz. She
It was Ellen.
Oh, okay.
We'll get into it.
All right. Yeah.
Got it.
All right. So next up will be the Robotics Club.
Good evening. My name is Frank Torini. I am the advisor and head coach for the Robotics Club. The Robotics Club is a group of students that we teach a lot of different manufacturing things for. What we do is we are part of the Mid-Atlantic Robotics District. So this year what we did was we went to Hatboro Horsham where we ranked 5th out of 31 teams, different high schools from all over this area. Then we went to Springside Chestnut Hill where we ranked 4th. We're getting better. We qualified to go to the Mid-Atlantic Championship up at Lehigh University. And up at Lehigh University, we were ranked 5th out of 81 teams. This gave us enough points to qualify us to go to Detroit to the World Championship. It was a very nice experience for the students. They got to meet kids from all over the world, team from Japan, team from Israel, all over the United States, and it was a great experience. Right now, I'd like to call up some of my coaches that work with me on this team, and it's kind of a unique club because I get to get coaches from different companies out there that sponsor our team. The team is a very kind of expensive thing. We raise about $30,000 every year to run the robotics club. It's all outside money that we raise from different companies, and we have a host of different engineers that can teach the kids all different kinds of engineering skills like mechanical, like programming the robot, electrical. And I'd like to call up some of the coaches so that they can shake hands with the with the students too. I also have Bob Lasavita from North Monco, because this is a joint team between North Penn and North Monco. I am the precision machine teacher over at North Monco, so we have a beautiful lab set up with CNC machines, about a dozen milling machines, about a dozen lathes. I often hear from other teams that they're very envious of what we have to work with, and it's nice to be able to teach the kids these skills to be able to work for engineering and manufacturing. So, Bob Lasavita from North Monco, Diane Wakefield from North Penn. She is also an advisor and a coach for the team. Dan Jones is the assistant head coach. David Chin is a coach. Brad Chunko is another engineering coach. Scott Deek and Ken Seiler. All right, let me read the students' names. Logan Adams, he's studying for finals. Mason Anir, good, he's going to do well. Jeanette Ament, Michael Amendola, Anoop Bhatt. Anoop is one of our programmers. Anoop is very good at programming vision for the robot. The robot works with a camera to pick up different colors and different visions and all. A great asset to our team. Zach Blanchard. Zach is a mechanical student on the team. Connor Chunko. Madison Eppers. No, I'm sorry. Alex Fenson-Matzer. Hunter Fadick. Brian Fluck. Brian is our safety engineer in the pits. What a great job he does. Chris Foster, Lisa Garnin, Ryan Heinz, Alex Hodges, Alex Ivan, Ben Jamiris, Evan Jones. And Evan is our driver of the robot. Many dents in the robot from Evan. Logan Little. Logan Little was on the business team, in charge of different handouts that we give out. Justin Lai, Lucas Morley, Olivia Mafusa, Nate O'Brien, Jared O'Neill, Nicole Owak, Jack Peters, Tejas, Patrick Riley, Scott Schwartz, Scott was our human player this year in the game. Chris Seiler. Chris is our head programmer for the robot. Stephen Seymour, Sally Shin, Brandon Spencer. Carly Waters, Jacob Zoll. That's it.
Mr. Trent, if you guys want to come on through, and the coaches too, please come through. Have everybody shake your hands. Thank you. Congratulations.
All right, dude. Great job. Okay, congratulations.
Congratulations. Congratulations. Congratulations. Congratulations. Congratulations. Congratulations.
These are for your students who work here.
Congratulations. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you for all you do.
Thanks, really appreciate it.
Congratulations. Thank you for all you do. 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 Congratulations. Thank you for all you do.
Thanks again, Paul.
Just another reminder that this meeting will be rebroadcast on the Comcast Channel 28 and Verizon Channel 29 on the following dates: Wednesday, June 13th at 7:30 p.m., Thursday, June 14th at 12:30 and 7:30, Friday, June 15th at 12:30 and 7:30, and again on Monday, June 18th at 12:30 p.m. Thank you. Moving on to the audience of citizens' public comment. I just have to read the statement that this meeting is being videotaped for community cable channels. Individuals attending this meeting and intending to speak to the board should be aware that they are being videotaped. In order to meet the requirements of Pennsylvania's Sunshine Law, it is necessary to record the names of all citizens who speak to the board during the meeting. To ensure compliance with this requirement, it is essential that those planning to address the board come to the microphone, state their name and address, and sign the audience of citizens logbook. Members of the audience are asked to limit their questions and comments. To allow time for all those who wish to speak to the board president may ask an individual to yield the microphone to the next speaker. Thank you. Would anyone like to make public comment?
Hi, Alexis Drolet, 28 Douglas Road, Lansdale. I'm a parent at Bridal Path Elementary. It's good to see some of you again. I've had email discussions or in-person discussions with almost all of you over the last month regarding my concern for class size for the upper elementary school grades, specifically, but not limited to, the graduating class of the third graders moving to fourth grade next year at Bridal Path Elementary. So I wanted to begin by thanking all of you that had emailed me back and have just done a lot of educating me in understanding everything that goes into making these decisions. So I really appreciate it. I see that the topic of building classroom utilization is on the agenda tonight, so I'm looking forward to learning more and hearing where we're at. So I come today just to keep the issue at the forefront of all your minds and to give voice to the fact that as parents, we're still kind of in the dark about what is happening with our students. The facts have not changed, so our numbers are still at the very upper limit of what is considered ideal for this age group. This group of kids has an exceptional number of special needs that we believe falls outside of the norm for a 3-classroom split, regardless of whatever conclusions are reached about the necessity to reduce class size overall moving forward. There would be 14 IEPs split across 3 teachers, the way that the current enrollment stands. So we hope the ball is moving in the right direction to provide for these kids in the way that they deserve. But we don't know. So I have a letter here that's signed by 60 third grade parents at Bridal Path Elementary School that just echoes the statements I've made today and in the past month via email to all of you. We are concerned about these kids and we hope that their needs will not be overlooked. Moving forward, we hope that you will continue to consider the needs of not only this particular group of students, but also the classrooms of kids that don't have a group of parents able to devote the time and energy to advocate for their kids in this public and vocal manner. Our hope is that the district will implement revised guidelines that are consistent with the current educational landscape, one which entails for the complete inclusion of students in a way that the current guidelines do not account for. So as we continue to discuss the complex matters of budget and classroom availability, both short-term and long-term, we ask that classroom size be not pushed aside. If we are truly interested in providing the best educational outcome for all students, I think we should talk to the teachers, the ones in the trenches, and find out what will help them. Is it new iPads and smart boards, or is it a classroom of 22 students instead of 29? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Drolet.
The signatures.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
Jennifer Hall, 109 Rosewood Drive. I also am a Bridal Path parent. I have 4 students at Bridal Path currently. I'm sorry, not students, well, children, my children. Some of you may remember me. I was here in August speaking. Speaking from our school, asking last year for our third grade, going into 4th grade students to have the extra section. I shared a personal story about my daughter. Sorry. Who is a selective mute, and how smaller class size would benefit her along with all of her classmates. I pleaded with you to consider making 4 sections, knowing the class size was very close to the exceeding limit of 89 students. Unfortunately, it didn't happen for Bridal Path in August. Instead, it wasn't until October, November, when the limit was reached and the teachers were at their wits' end. Do you know what that meant for my child and her classmates? It meant that when they came back from Thanksgiving break, they had to switch classrooms and had a brand new teacher to get comfortable with. For a child like mine and other students that have anxiety and other special needs, it takes a few weeks just to adjust to someone new. By the time that occurred, it was winter break. After winter break, everyone had to take the time to get back into routines. All of this added up to over a month or more of interrupted instruction for our kids, 4th grade year. Not to mention the difficult moments they endured in September and October. In these large classrooms, there were too many disruptions within the school day due to overcrowded rooms and special needs of the students within them. That is unacceptable, and we can do better. I am here again tonight because I have another 3rd grade student who is going into 4th grade this year. And we are finding ourselves in the same position. I am hoping that we can learn from past mistakes and make better, more informed choices this time. I am pleading with you to give this new class of 4th graders what they need from the start. Don't wait until it interrupts instructional time. The students and the district can't afford it. Not only am I a parent of 4 children in North Penn School District, I am also a special education teacher in a nearby district. I have taught in pull-out programs and in inclusive co-taught classrooms. I have seen and know a lot about it. I know that both models are good for certain students with different types of needs. I have seen the co-teaching model work beautifully when done correctly. I have seen it be a disaster when carried out incorrectly. But I am not here to discuss which model I feel is best. I'm really here to bring light to the fact that right now in our schools, we have the inclusion model. This means that when we talk about having 28 students in a classroom, we are talking about those 28 students with all of their individual needs staying in the classroom the entire day. We are talking about adding extra teachers coming in and out of the classrooms all day long. You might not think about that, but that is a disruption too, every time. I have a visual, if you're okay with me. It's not anything fancy, but I feel like a lot of times students learn better with visuals, so I wanted to show you this. So here is a classroom. The X's are students. The pink X is the teacher. This is a classroom full of 28 students. Back in the day, a couple years ago even, when ELA was taught and math was taught, this classroom of 28 students didn't stay a classroom of 28 students. The students who had special needs, who needed extra help in reading, language arts, math, they left. Therefore, this was the classroom that was being taught. About 22 students, that's what I have here. Much more flexible, a lot more room, a lot less interruption. Right now, what we have is a classroom of 28 students with the teacher and another teacher and sometimes another teacher, all in the same room with all of the needs, some being academic, some being behavior, teachers doing what they need to do to help the students. But it's a lot of disruption for being such a large class. I'm almost done, I promise. So really now I think it's time to look at our class limits and realize that what was okay 10 years ago is not okay in the classrooms we have today. We need a classroom size limit to be smaller so that when we have a classroom full of students and 2 teachers and a bunch of needs in the classroom, the teachers are still able to do their jobs. Obviously, one solution would be just make the classroom size limit smaller, realizing that it may cause problems with space in the different schools, finding enough classrooms for all of these classes. Someone mentioned to me another solution, one that may be more feasible and would take into account the needs of all the students within the class. If the district was able to come up with a formula to account for the extra work that is necessary to meet the needs of the students with 504s and IEPs within the classroom, it may help identify the classes that truly need an extra section. For example, if a student who has no extra needs, they are a 1. If a student has an IEP and has needs in math, ELA, and behavior, that student would be ranked higher, such as a 1.6. So when looking at the class numbers, that student will need more support to be counted, and so will be counted as more than 1, showing that they require more help than someone who receives no services. No matter which way we look at it, doing nothing isn't the answer. Figuring out whether lowering the class limit size or configuring a formula to better match class size with reality of the students within the class are a couple of ways to fix some of the problems we are facing right now. I'm coming to you as a parent of, obviously, many students in North Penn School District, and I'm asking you to please do something with the class size. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hall. Is there anyone else that would like to make public comment?
Hi, I'm Jessica Smith, 1507 Taylor Road in Lansdale. And I just want to echo what these 2 other moms said. I will have 4 kids at Bridal Path in the fall. I have a current 4th grader who went through what was just shared. He's a regular ed student. It was incredibly stressful for him. September and October, he came home in tears many days, and nothing usually phases him. But just the crowd in the classroom and some of the students that had outbursts, unplanned outbursts, and just took a lot of attention from the teacher was very stressful for him. When November came and he was moved to the new classroom, it was like night and day difference. So that was wonderful that it happened. It was just a shame that it took so long. Now I have a third grader, so I'm in the same spot. And we would just love for this to not be a reactionary, issue, but maybe proactive. Again, considering that I think there is 6 more students in this third grade class with an IEP than last year. So that would have been 3 per classroom, whereas this year is 5, I think, or this coming up class. So just to consider, again, maybe the needs of the actual class. And I know there's other elementary classrooms across the district that may have, an overloaded issue similar to our third grade. So look at them as an individual basis. With the 15 IEPs in the upcoming 4th grade class, I know the teachers would love to stay as a 4-class 4th grade. A lot of the parents who've been through it understand. So again, just echoing what they said, asking you to consider the issues with Bridal Path in the upcoming 4th grade class. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Is there anyone else that would like to make public comment? No? Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on now to the interviews with the potentially new school board directors. So first up will be Elizabeth Ferrara. Good evening, Ms. Ferrara. How are you doing tonight?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. So the formats before, we usually had the candidate, introduce themselves, give a brief background, why they'd be interested, and then we can just go around and have the board members ask some questions.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you for inviting me tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of all of you. My name is Elizabeth Ferraro. I am a lifelong resident of the North Penn School District. I attended Gwinnore Elementary, Pembroke Middle School, and then I graduated from North Penn in 2010 with several of your children. So on a personal note, I met my husband at Pembroke, and we recently bought a home in Hatfield. And when we were choosing our home, we knew we wanted to stay in the North Penn District. We wanted our children to have the same opportunities that we had when we were students here. So while I'm not a parent currently, I do have a particular interest in ensuring, the best possible future for the district. So I'm interested in joining the board because of my passion for public education. I am committed to investing in the future of the community's children and making sure that this district stays a top caliber district in the state. I love learning, but I was not made to be a teacher, which I know many of you are, and I really respect those who are able to teach, but I felt that my skills would better serve the children of the community as a board member rather than a teacher. I think as a product of, the North Penn schools, I have an interesting perspective. I am familiar with the experience. I know what opportunities I had as a North Penn student, and I know where we have room for improvement and, what changes should be made or could be made. I think we're in an interesting time right now of social change and technological advancement where the board has an opportunity and the district has an opportunity to be proactive rather than reactive in many of these circumstances. And I'd like the opportunity to be a part of the team that makes those decisions. Professionally, I'm an attorney and I work in tax and wealth management. In this role, I work with my clients and my colleagues to develop plans for my clients' personal and financial success and wellness. As an estate planner, I'm often looking towards the future and making plans and reevaluating them and assessing successes and failures and revising where necessary. A large part of my job is explaining really complex and technical matters and making them understandable and easy to follow. I think a lot of the professional skills that I have in that role would serve me well as a school board member here. And while I don't work directly in education on a day basis, it is part of my daily life. My husband is an administrator at Springfield Township High School. My sister's an art teacher, and many of my friends have come back to work in the North Penn schools here. So I'm looking at this as an opportunity to become more involved in the community and to serve a district that really served me well.
Thank you, Mrs. Ferraro. So what would you say is the biggest issue facing public education in North Penn in particular today?
So I think one of the things that North Penn really, I think it's a strength, but it can often be one of our weaknesses, which is our size. You know, the district with so many students and so many community members, there's lots of opportunity to, you know, offer a diverse, you know, class selection and involvement in student activities, just the awards we saw here tonight. You know, there's robotics club and there's the thespian troupe and there's, you know, our basic core curriculum and the English program. And so I think the size is something that is to our advantage, but often people are worried about their students becoming lost. And so you have to take into consideration, especially with the diversity of this area, you know, making sure that there's a place for everyone and we're including everyone and we're being sensitive to those differences and we're making them an asset rather than something that's holding the district back.
Thank you. Where did Mr. Fusco go? I was going to start on this. Oh, there he is. Oh, you were sitting over here. Okay, I'm usually, okay.
Good start? All right.
Yes, we all right.
Thank you for presenting tonight. So as a prospective board member, I am curious to know what drives you to want to do this? Many of us at the table tonight, well, besides being crazy, many of us at the table tonight did campaign to get here and talk to the public about what initiatives were the big initiatives that we had on our minds. So you could just tell me maybe one big initiative that you could foresee yourself wanting to work toward and put your time into as a member of the school board.
So I think my general drive, of course, is investing in the children of this community. But in terms of issues generally, I first of all would want to take a step back and gather the perspective that all of you have. So as an outside person looking in, I like to think that I keep myself well informed, but I know that most of you have way more things that are crossing your paths in terms of information and research and the studies that you've conducted on many of these issues that I don't have particular familiarity with at this time. So taking that into consideration, I do support the efforts for full-day kindergarten. I think it's a really important asset for this district to implement that within the near future. I think it's an advantage in terms of education, and it's, you know, kindergarten is this foundation, and we want to ensure that, you know, we're starting our students off on the best foot. And it's also important in this changing time where the majority of households are two-parent working households. And to have a half-day program, whether it's morning or afternoon, there's so many more obstacles for parents to be juggling to be sending their children to half-day kindergarten.
Thank you. Mrs. Burkowski, you want to?
Knowing your position on full-day kindergarten and its major competitor, smaller class sizes, and we can't do both. Where are you?
Ouch.
We can't.
The crowd is watching.
I know.
So
They watch up here, too.
it's really tough. I think that there are a lot of factors to balance with the classroom size. There's, to my understanding, the reason they're conflicting is it largely space, or would you say that it's largely resources, financial and teaching resources, if I can ask a follow-up question?
Space is the
Space.
initial one.
Okay.
Resources is the next one.
Yeah. So, it's really tough. I then may have to lean on the side of class size. I have seen many people go through the district with half-day kindergarten and come out as successful, well-rounded adults. And, you know, of course, there is a detriment to it, and there are studies showing that those with full-day kindergarten are more productive. But I think our current students, if they're in an environment where they aren't learning and they aren't having the opportunities that they need to have, I think that's something that should be addressed.
Thank you.
Mr. Diazio, do you want to? Mr. Casa?
I'll always have a question. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time and for being here to share your thoughts tonight. Not everyone in our community does this, so we're very thankful for people who want to attain this level of volunteerism and giving back to the community. Larger picture, in considering being a board member, a board director, if I have that term proper, what is your perspective, or as to what would your approach be as a board member, or the context as to being a board member? How would you serve the community?
So as a new board member, I think there would definitely be an adjustment period for me to gather all the information that I would need and come up to speed with everything that you guys have been tackling from here. In terms of how I would take the role, I think educating myself on the issues in our district and taking into account all of the diverse perspectives that we have, students, community members, parents, taxpayers who don't have any children, those who may not have children or those who have had children age out of the system. There are a lot of perspectives in our community, and as a board member, I would consider my role to be taking all of those perspectives into account and to make those decisions that I felt served in the best interest of the children.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, and that's exactly what I was looking for, your individual role, but then as a board itself, the entire board, what do you feel the board's role is in relation to the district?
I feel that the board's role is to develop the best possible policies within the financial resources that the board or that the district has available to develop quality programming and I guess just serving the community the best they can within the finite resources that they have available, and to make the tough decisions that need to be made to make sure that this district can continue to function generally, but also to excel.
Thank you. Ms. Ott?
Thank you for being up here tonight. One of the things that really stood out to me, actually, there were two things. One, I love that you went through this district. I think that being as young as you are and as early in your career and coming out here and wanting to do this sets a really great example for the children in this district, so I applaud that. One of the things I noticed too is the amount of outreach and community involvement you have. I think you work with quite a few different groups. I mean, I noticed you work closely with first responders and veterans. You work with our senior community, you work with a lot of childhood development groups. So taking that experience, how would you go about reaching out to really every group within our community and making sure that the message of, you know, what we're doing and why we're doing it gets out there in a way that every individual group can understand that and appreciate that?
So in terms of just community outreach, I think there's a lot of different approaches that we could take to that. So there are these different groups that we have, right? So the easiest ones to get to are the parents. They're there, they're hopefully reading what's being sent home, maybe sometimes, and they're the group that you at least have the direct line of contact with. I think it's harder to reach out to those who are done with the system, so to say. Their kids have graduated, they're done, they're just living their empty nesting life. And so reaching out to them, I think, needs to be a more personal contact with them. I don't necessarily think that's the group that's going to be scrolling through the Facebook page and reading what's going on with the day. So having a presence in the community, at community activities, whether they're district related or not, to reach out to those groups who aren't necessarily the ones who are involved on a daily basis. And I know that there have been a lot of efforts recently in the district to reach out to alumni more. I think one of the head people of that is actually from my graduating class. So I think those efforts are what can bring people back in, whether or not they have children in our district.
Thank you. Mrs. Ramage?
6 out of 8 of us are new to the school board. And so one of the things, the takeaways that I had from a new school board director training was that as individuals, we have no authority. Our authority comes from being part of a group. So if you were appointed this evening, how would you work to join the group? How would you get to know the group, the individual members?
So I think when you're working on a team like this one, in my opinion, the best way to get to know everyone is personally first, and then working with them on these collaborative efforts. So, you know, partisanship aside, you need to work with everybody. You know, serving the district is in the best interest of the children and the community, and if you're sitting in one of these seats, I presume that you agree. So I think getting to know everyone on a personal basis, and you already have that connection, and then developing these working relationships to be able to reach across the aisle and compromise and find the best possible solutions that we're looking for.
Thank you. Mrs. G?
Can you talk a little bit about, since you graduated, your involvement specifically with the district or with, you know, I guess any involvement that you've had that you think will help inform you on matters that could come before the board?
So I think my level of involvement at this point is just a general keeping up with what's happening in the district, staying on top of, you know, what you guys are discussing here and what is, you know, hot button issues in the community and how they're being handled. I've had, obviously, contact with the alumni. I was the vice president of my class when I was here, so reunions have fallen on my shoulders for good or for worse. So I think I have, you know, that connection where there are people I can reach out to bring them back into and become more invested. As I mentioned, I also have several friends who are teaching in the district. So now that I am no longer a student, I have gotten this other side of, you know, what are the teachers dealing with? What are the big challenges for them? How, you know, what's going on in their classrooms that could be going better, you know, might need more attention, or what's really working. So I think that transition has really changed my perspective a little bit.
Thank you, Mrs. Ferrara. Does anyone else have any other follow-up questions or anything?
Can I ask one other question? Your background and experience with tax law, is it mostly with individuals, or do you have experience working with, like, tax law with corporations and businesses?
So a large majority of the work that I do is individual taxes. It's income, gift, and estate tax. We also handle some business, corporate, and partnership taxation based on what our clients are dealing with at that time.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Great. Okay, Ms. Ferrara, I think we're going to ask you to wait out in the hallway while we interview the next candidate. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. McPain. How are you doing tonight?
I'm fine. How are you, Mrs. Stoll?
I'm good, thank you. So our format is that we give the candidate an opportunity to introduce himself, 2-minute, whatever, introduction on to why you would want to be a board member, and then we will go around and have the board members ask questions.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sure.
First, I want to thank Mr. Scrocky, Dr. Dietrich, Dr. Holman, the entire board, and the entire board staff for having me here this evening. A district this size does not meet success without great leadership at the top. And I think for a number of years now, we've seen that here in North Penn. So it's all the more meaningful to me to have an opportunity to join this leadership team in this way. So my wife and I moved in here from Upper Perk area in about 2006. We are both teachers. I've taught for 15 years now at Upper Dublin High School. World History, 11th grade, everybody's favorite. My wife teaches 3rd grade at Penn Ridge, P.A. Guth Elementary School, and she's done that for 12 years. I come from a pretty strong-minded family of educators. My father taught business education at middle school level. My mother was an elementary school teacher as well as my mother-in-law. On top of that, my grandfather served the school board up in Perk Valley for a number of years there as well. So conversations around the dinner table for my family for the past several decades have not been so much about what's on television, but a little bit more about what happened at school that day and the value of education and things like that. And so that's what sort of informs me as I approach a position like this. I've also had wonderful opportunities to serve the educational communities that I've been a part of. As a student, I've tried to take part in everything I could that was possible for me at the college level as well. I valued the opportunities that I had to help both my peers and people that were younger than me in all those respects. As an alumni, I'm very active with Shippensburg University. And where I work now at Upper Dublin, I've done, once again, as much as I can to try to increase the level of education that students get in that setting. Taken together, it's clear that I value education, but as I started to become a teacher for more than 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, the ideal of giving all kinds of educational opportunities to every student we could gets shot down a little bit because there's limitations. There's the types of things that you can't find the funding for, the types of things that no matter how hard we try, we can't get done. And so that sort of dose of reality is also something that I bring in my philosophy of education these days. But hopefully, with the leadership that we have here, and we have an optimistic but realistic approach, I think that if there's one trait that I have that would assist with where North Penn is going, it's that I value myself as a good listener. You can't teach high school without understanding where students are coming from, and I've had all kinds of students over the years. And I've extended that into all the organizations I've been a part of. I look forward to your questions, and thank you very much again for having me.
Thank you, Mr. McBain. So the question that we've asked everyone that's had to come up before the board is, what do you consider the biggest issue facing public education today, and North Penn in particular?
The North Penn School District is facing issues that are so much like every other public school institution in the state. There's facility concerns, there's trying to meet the needs of students that have diverse needs, either from socioeconomic status or their origins and how they define themselves. The types of things that other districts face economically, the types of things that districts face in bringing technology into the classroom in a way that works. These are all issues that the North Penn faces. But I think that the way in which we attack these difficulties comes from the strengths that we see here on the board as well. Here in leadership positions, we have people that have expertise in many fields. If we're looking at improving school safety, we have somebody that knows about that. If we want to improve special education, we have somebody that knows about that. And if we all come together and listen to each other and listen to our own expertise and the things that we can accomplish together, we really do begin to make a difference. So that's first and foremost as sort of a base level attack of all the issues we face. But I think right now, if I'm thinking about the student that goes to North Penn School District every day, it's going to be the facilities. It's going to be a revolving caseload. Right now, I think it's NAP. I think we've got to make sure that the projects that the board is looking at continue on in a smart way. And after that, there's going to be other buildings that we need to take a look at. So for right now, I think that's one of the main issues. And from that point on, we deal with it as it comes.
Thank you. Oh, I think we'll go around this way this time. So, Ms. G, do you have a question?
So you spoke to your involvement and your experience as an educator. Specifically, though, in North Penn, can you talk about your involvement here and how that will best inform your decision as a board member and, you know, in the issues that could possibly come before the board?
Absolutely. Here in the North Penn community, I've been very active on the community side of things. My children are not so old that they are taking part in a lot of sports or activities yet, so that's on the way. In the summer, we will be playing soccer up at TYA. It should be a good time. But other than that, I've been active in trying to change my community for the better in a number of ways, and one of those is on the political side. And I know that the political topic is not something that's welcome a lot of the time, but for a history teacher that talks about world history day in, day out for 15 years in a row and knows the value of being able to affect the government both locally and statewide and federally, that's something that you want to take part in. And I've always done it with civility. In the North Penn area, I've found candidates that I believe in, and I've gone out and I've met neighbors and introduced those candidates to neighbors. More locally in my own neighborhood, I've tried to fill the needs that I saw, whether they be small or large. On one side of things, my wife and I run the community garage sale. It's kind of a small thing. There's only 165 homes in the community, but they needed somebody to take it over and get everything done, and we've done that for a number of years now. In all those aspects, I try to make sure that there is a sense of community. Just before this meeting out there, I had the opportunity to speak with some of the students that were being honored for Latin Exam Robotics Club, and they told me where they were going, what they were studying, and a lot of them spoke to the idea that what they had here in North Penn is what set them up for those things. And I think that the more we can push that sense of community, the more that we can make people feel belonging to the community and bring people in, fill the needs and fill the gaps that we see, the more often students like that are going to come back and work here and do better things for this community.
Thank you. Mrs. Ramage, do you have a question?
Yes, so 6 out of 8 of us are new to the school board. And so one of the takeaways that I took from a new school director's training was that as individuals, we have no authority, but our authority comes from working as a group. So if you were to be appointed tonight, how would you work to join the group and become part of the school board?
Thank you. First and foremost, just listen like crazy. I value the expertise in the room, and I would try to take on the traits that they have found successful. There are also 9 school board members for a reason, I believe. I don't believe that any one person is supposed to have so much power in this school district. It's a very American idea. I think that there's a large difference between disagreement between members and distrust between members. And I think disagreement is one of the most healthy things you can have in this kind of leadership position. So I would love to speak with all the board members. I've already reached out to many of you about how to approach this project the right way and what's needed in the district. And I think that when we sit down and recognize that each of us has a certain level of expertise, a set of experiences, and our own ideas about what works and what doesn't, I hope to both listen and then add to that. I think that as a classroom teacher, I've seen a whole bunch of policies that look really good on paper and then just don't work out in the classroom where the rubber meets the road. And I would want to contribute to that conversation with civility. I would want to make sure that everybody felt that they had been listened to and that everybody had time taken out for them to be understood.
Thank you. Ms. Ott, do you have any questions? No? Mr. Casa?
Hey, thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate anyone who volunteers to serve the community, and especially in a role such as this. So thank you. When you've discussed or described the role of the board a few times, I want to hear some more about how you perceive, we've heard of your approach, but how do you perceive your individual role as a board member?
Thank you. The school board has 2 sort of opposing jobs. They need to either validate the visions that administrators put forward or add to those visions themselves. To do that takes a lot of collaboration, it takes a lot of creativity, specifically in the area of funding, and it requires listening skills that are absolutely on point every time. When a student disagrees with the way I've graded an essay, I've got to come back to class the next day and try my best to get back to that student again in a positive way and reestablish relationships. That's extremely important to me. Beyond that, the board's other opposing sort of thing that it needs to do is guard the taxpayers' money. This is really the last barrier between money that is spent in ways that may not help the district and money that is well spent or money that is saved for members of the community. When we talk about the community and how the school is defined by the community and vice versa, we can't leave people out. We can't leave people out when decisions are being made, especially about funding in those types of ways.
And it's just a follow-up then, and thank you for that answer. As an individual, how do you see a group of 9 school board directors? What is that overall goal in your mind?
To serve the community well, to listen, to collaborate, to go out and meet members of the community. It's very clear to me that this is a board that is already doing those things very well. You've reached out, you've had community events, you've had opportunities for members that have not spoken up before to speak up, and that's extremely important. Hope I answered your question. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Giazio? Okay. Mr. Fusco?
Thank you, Mr. McBain. One of the challenges that I've had in this role for the short time that I've been here as an educator is trying to define my understanding of this role as an educator. Whereas sometimes as a teacher, you're in the weeds.
Yes.
And as a board member, you're to be a little bit more of a visionary. So I guess I'm just wondering if you've considered that and how you plan to compartmentalize those two roles moving forward.
Yes, excellent question. Thank you very much. If I have a vision that I want to share with the board as a result of being a teacher, I will. But to get stuck in the weeds is the kind of thing that frankly, it hinders the activity of our administrators who already know what they're doing. They have their jobs and we have ours. And it's important that we set guidelines for ourselves in how we approach these situations. A community's collaborative effort to reach a goal needs a place for everyone. And when we have board members or administrators leading that vision, things work out. And when we work collaboratively and lean on each other for our expertise, those things will go much better than if you or I have an idea about which kind of inter-right boards to use in the coming future. That's not what we're here for. We can double check to make sure the prices on those are good, because you and I kind of know that kind of stuff. But beyond that, we need to trust in the administrators and the teachers to make those decisions. And we have wonderful administrators and teachers that make those decisions every day, I believe.
Thank you. Mrs. Burkowski?
I had it anyway.
Financing or?
That'll come
Okay.
into play. You've recognized that the finances are an issue, and you're there for your children and the children of the district.
Yes.
Where do you stand on full-day kindergarten, whether we need it or not, how we would implement it?
I have heard from a number of elementary school teachers that full-day kindergarten works. I've heard from a number of teachers that it does not work. It's kind of the same about asking about inclusion. In North Penn, we've done really well, I believe, in comparison with many other districts in the area with including all types of learners in our various regular education classrooms, supplemented by special education. In this district, it's done well, but in a neighboring district, it may not be. And there's differences there that we need to tackle. In the same way, we need to see what full-day kindergarten looks like here in North Penn. And I think that has there's more to that than financing and the studies of academic papers from folks who have never been here. We need to take a look at ways in which teachers would respond to having that kind of workload. Do we have the facilities to hold those classrooms and do it properly? Are we putting a teacher in a really small room? Perhaps a pilot program would be best, given as an opportunity for willing parents in the community who want to test that out. I don't know. You folks have been discussing that a lot more than I have been able to keep up with, but I hope to learn about that and what you found soon. And I hope that answers your question.
I'll have a follow-on for it, too. There's another group of concerned parents that feel class sizes are too high or bordering too high, or, and that's directly competing with the desires of full-day kindergarten with respect to facilities and availability to house them both. You can't do both. Where do you fall?
The board has decided we can't do both in that the schools can't hold a certain number of classrooms as they stand?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, the board hasn't decided. That's Ms. Perkowski's
Okay.
individual
Sorry.
understanding
I'm new
of
here,
the
so I'm just
situation.
trying
Let's
to be
fill in
clear.
on that.
My turn. If you,
Okay.
if you look at the next section, the paperwork for the next section.
Yes.
It shows it in black and white, a little highlighting in yellow, I think. Huh?
If given the choice between full-day kindergarten and lowering class sizes, I feel that it's tough for me to answer that question because I believe that, from what I understand, it's fairly early on in the process and there's a lot of creative solutions that have yet to be heard. I really would feel uncomfortable saying that I believe in doing one over another because both are something that is not indicative of the type of education that we would have in North Penn if we couldn't do it correctly. I hope that answers your question.
Sounds like a true politician.
It's the truth.
You're
It's
dancing
all,
around the answer.
No, I'll tell you why. The nuance matters. You know, the goal of the board in making these decisions is met by the various viewpoints here. You know, I said there's a difference between disagreement and distrust. We should be disagreeing about that, and we should be going through that process, listening to each of those disagreements every single time. And frankly, I haven't been here yet. So I want to be part of that process. And I want to make sure it's done correctly according to what I believe. I'm not sure where the rest of the board stands in certain ways. I'm not sure what some of the numbers look like in certain ways, but I'm trying to be truthful, and that's where I stand.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McBain. Okay, so does anyone have any other questions or? Good? Okay, I think last time we had the candidates wait outside, right?
I think they actually said.
Oh, they both actually came in? Okay, all right,
Thank you.
all right. While we have the candidates come in, does anyone want to make public comment about what they just heard of either candidate? Nope. Okay. Is Christine going to get them? Yeah. Okay. Oh, she went to go get them.
We're all looking at the audience, hoping that maybe we'll get some feedback. And it doesn't have to be in support of one versus the other. It can more just be about what you heard and things like that.
Feedback that I wanted to give was I would hope that long-term this is not we either do full-day kindergarten or we reduce class size. I would like to see moving forward a vision of how do we make this work. I am so sick of getting the answer that there's not room, okay? That's not the answer, that's the problem. The problem is there isn't room. So what can we do about this? I know you can't fix it next year. 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Yes, I want my kid in a class of 22 instead of 29, but I also don't want to be here every year fighting for this, and I don't want all the kids coming through fighting for it. So I would love to do these creative solutions, whatever they are, plan financially for the facilities problems that we all recognize that there are.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, your name was Mrs. Hall, right?
No, Mrs. Drolay.
Mrs. Drolay, sorry.
Yep, thank you.
Yep. Okay, does anyone else have any public comment? Okay, so I guess we'll go on to take a motion to nominate.
You can, you don't need a motion, you can actually just open nominations.
Okay.
Take
can
any
I
nominations.
Open nominations.
I nominate Mr. McBain.
Do I have a second?
You don't need a second, you
I
can
don't
just
need a
take any
second.
other.
All right,
I'd like to nominate Elizabeth Ferrara.
okay. So, and then
Any
close
other?
nominate, any other?
Then a motion to close.
Motion to close?
Motion
Motion
to
closed?
close.
Okay, good. All right, so,
Second.
second? Do I need a second? Okay. That's all right, so a second by Mr. Diazio.
The vote on the motion.
Vote on the motion.
All in favor?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion
To
carries.
vote on the motion?
Vote
To
to
close
vote.
the
on the
To close
nominations.
nominations.
Close
To
the
close the
nominations.
nominations, to close the nominations, sorry. You would think I have this down by now.
I don't think I would.
So I apologize. Okay. So, Mr. Scrocky, are we going to do a roll call vote?
Roll
like
call
we've done
vote,
before?
yes.
Okay.
So indicate the candidate when I call your name, please, Mr. McBain or Mrs. Ferraro. We're going to start with Mrs. G.
Mr. McBain?
Mrs. Prokowski,
Mrs. Ferraro.
Ms. Ott,
Mrs. Ferrara.
Mrs. Ramich,
Mrs. Ferraro.
Mr. Fusco,
Mr. McBain.
Mr. Casa,
Mr. McBain.
Mr. Diazio,
Ferraro.
Mrs. Stoll,
I just want to say before I vote that I am voting for somebody, not against somebody, but I'm voting for Mr. McBain.
So we have 4 votes for Mr. McBain, 4 votes for Mrs. Ferraro.
Okay. So, round 2?
You have a number of options. You, obviously, it takes a majority of the remaining board, so 5 votes to fill the appointment. You can conduct another set of nominations. You can take nominations. You are not limited to the 2 individuals that interviewed tonight. It may be helpful to have some discussion among the board as to the rationale for voting for certain individuals before conducting an additional round of voting. That's up to the board.
Okay.
Sorry, Kyle. Could you go back to the second option? I'm sorry.
Sure. Maybe I'll just go through the
Yeah,
options
just go
again.
through it one more time. I'm sorry.
So the board could take no action. There is a tie. If the board takes no action at all and does not fill the vacancy within 30 days of when it was created, citizens from the community can petition the court to fill the vacancy. It takes 10 taxpayers from within the district can petition the Court of Common Pleas, and the court can appoint someone to the vacancy. Another alternative would be to just open the floor for nominations again at this moment, just like we just did. Take any nominations. Just to be clear, you are not limited to only the 2 individuals who spoke or were interviewed tonight. You could, after reopening the floor for nominations, vote again. And my last point was just you could have some discussion at this point as to the rationale of the various board members for why you voted for the certain candidate that you did, perhaps to result in a different outcome than a 4-4 vote.
Okay.
And what is our 30-day, when was that? What's the 30-day?
May 15th was the effective date of Mr. Warren's resignation.
Okay. So does anyone have any other comments that they'd like to make as to why they voted the way they did, or do we want to take in nominations?
I'm happy to comment.
Go ahead.
I was in a tough spot. I feel like we had 2 phenomenal candidates. One of the things that really stood out to me was Ms. Ferraro's unique perspective that she's bringing to the district. And I feel that throughout the interview, she not only listened to what was being said, but she did come forward with quite a few answers. And I think I applaud you for, I know we threw a couple of difficult ones at you, and you did. You took a difficult path and you answered them, and I do respect that, and I appreciate that. That is very much part of why I voted the way I did.
Does anyone else have any comments?
I also would like to comment that I think that we are incredibly fortunate. These are volunteer positions, and that we have two incredible candidates who, and I know from experience that standing up and giving an interview while standing in front of an audience in front of a camera is incredibly difficult. I think both candidates did exceedingly well at that. I think we have to look at candidates that this is a position, this is somebody that will fill the group, right? We're looking for someone and what they offer the group. And I'm looking at both their backgrounds and skills and career experiences, but also then how they approach a problem, and how they might then be able to help, add to the discussion or add to what we're doing. And for me, that was very difficult. But I think that looking at backgrounds and skills, I think it's important that we're bringing people in that have different skill sets and backgrounds than what we have.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Casa.
I'd like to echo that in this case, a tough decision is a good decision, and we have two very good candidates before us. In my decision for Mr. McBain, what weighed into that was his decision-making process and really being mindful of the larger picture as to what this means strategically for the board to proceed, and coming to the decision about facilities and how a lot of our issues emanate from that priority itself resonated with me. There's a certain gravitas to the answers that Mr. McBain was able to convey and elaborate upon, that it's not a negative to the other candidate, but it was simply, in my opinion, a strength of Mr. McBain that is something I feel will be very beneficial to this board and its deliberative process going forward.
Anyone else have any comments or questions? Or
A comment that Ms. Ott made when Ms. Ferrara was speaking about how young she is and how involved she is and willing to get involved and give back. And I think that's important. I don't know when Mr. McBain got involved, but it was pointed out that she did get involved early. And I think it's really good to see the younger people, all of you, get involved, right away in a position that I believe really makes a difference and can make a difference in there. And I'm just pleased to have someone with such caliber of her credentials and her activity and stuff. And she was a North Penn graduate too. I like that. Class of 2010 too.
Yes.
Thank you.
It is a difficult choice. Mr. Fusco, do you have any other comments or anything?
My only comment is that they are both exceptional candidates, and I am familiar with the work that Mr. McBain has done in this community firsthand. I've seen it. I've seen firsthand the effort and advocacy he's put into making this a better community. I applaud Ms. Ferrero for wanting to be a part of a similar initiative to move the community forward. I just think that Mr. McBain's experience doing so is at this point in time a greater asset to the board, and I would encourage, regardless of the outcome, for both to continue to serve the community in whatever way that they see fit.
I would concur with that. As a Gwen-Nor Pembroke North Penn graduate myself, I am happy to see that you're stepping up. And I would absolutely encourage you to continue to stay involved in local, politics, no matter how this turns out this evening. And I, too, have seen Mr. McBain's work in the community over the last 10 years, I think. It's been impressive. He works very hard for the local community. So it is a tough choice. I think we'll be fine either way. So I guess, should we just open up nominations again? See, turns out different. Okay. Do I have any nominations?
I nominate Mr. McBain.
Okay. Mrs. Perkowski?
And I nominate Mrs. Ferrara.
All right, so I move to close nominations. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Diazio. Okay. Mr. Scrocky, could you please do the roll call again?
Okay, again, we have two candidates. Please indicate your choice by indicating the candidate's name, Mr. McBain or Mrs.
Hold on one
Ferrara.
second. Did we vote on the?
Oh, I'm
do we need a
sorry.
motion to
I'm sorry.
close?
Yeah, we need a motion to close. So.
So moved.
So moved. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay.
Okay, this time we're starting with Mrs. Ramich.
Ms. Ferrero.
Mrs. G.
Mr. McBain.
Mr. Fusco.
Mr. McBain.
Mr. Casa.
Mr. McBain.
Mrs. Perkowski.
Mrs. Ferrara.
Ms. Ott.
Mrs. Ferrara.
Mr. Diazio.
Mrs. Ferraro.
Mrs. Stoll.
Mr. McBain.
4-4.
Are both candidates still interested in being up for the position? Does anyone want to drop out? Put it right at the
Yeah, I didn't think so.
No?
I would say at this point, I don't know that we should continue. I think the votes are where the votes are, and the process will go from here. Unless, I don't know if anybody else feels any different.
Is there the possibility to, I don't know that this will make any difference, but we would have to call another session prior to the 30 days or prior to when it goes to, how exactly would that work?
Good question. Within the 30 days of the vacancy, it is the sole right of the board to fill that vacancy. After 30 days and the vacancy has not been filled, 10 resident taxpayers of the school district may petition the court to appoint a qualified individual from within the district. Once that petition has been submitted to the court, then it is the ability of the court to make that appointment. However, if after there is case law that says that if after 30 days no one has petitioned the court, the board still has the ability to fill that vacancy.
All right. One more round?
I don't know, I was just gonna recommend that, because I feel like I agree with Mr. DiHazio for us to just keep voting. Perhaps we need to recess at, or reconvene and at another time, which I guess would be before the 15th, which is 3 days from now. I mean, I think we have to determine how we're either going to make the decision prior to, or how we're going to move forward. It doesn't seem like we're going to get there during this meeting.
We got there before. Took 5 rounds, but we did.
But you had more candidates too.
It's been done.
Not that long ago.
Right? All right, I say go for one more round, and then see what goes from there. Do I have any nominations?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Mrs. Ferrero.
Really? Okay. Do I have any other nominations?
I will nominate Mr. McBain.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to close nominations?
Motion to close.
Second? Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Scrocky, one more time, please.
Okay, again, two candidates, please indicate by the candidate's name, Mr. McBain or Mrs. Ferraro. Mr. Fusco?
Mr. McBain.
Mr. Casa?
Mr. McBain.
Mrs. Prokowski?
Mrs. Ferraro?
Mrs. G?
Mr. McBain.
Ms. Ott?
Mrs. Ferrara.
Mrs. Ramage?
Ms. Ferraro.
Mr. Diazio?
Ms. Ferraro.
And Mrs. Stoll.
You could make this end.
I could. We all could. Mr. McBain.
4-4.
From Utilization Study.
One more time. Do I have a nomination?
Mrs. Ferraro?
Okay.
Mr. McBain.
Do I have a motion to close nominations?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Scrocky?
Okay, once again, two candidates, please indicate the candidate's name. Mr. Casa?
Mr. McBain.
Mrs. Prokowski?
Mrs. Ferraro?
Ms. Ott?
Mrs. Ferrara.
Mrs. Ramage?
I really hate to see this go on the way that it has. I do think that this is indicative of some larger conversations that I think we need to have. And I will echo, I believe what Mrs. Stoll said, that this is not a vote against someone, but I think this is really a vote of being able to move forward. So I will change my vote and vote for Mr. McBain.
Mrs. G?
Mr. McBain.
Mr. Fusco?
Mr. McBain.
Mr. Diazio?
Ms. Ferraro.
And Mrs. Stoll.
Mr. McBain.
5 votes for Mr. McBain.
Well, congratulations, Mr. McBain, and thank you, Mrs. Ferraro, for coming out to try and I do encourage you to stay involved. So, okay, thank you. So now we'll have, I guess, the swearing in. Mr. McBain, Mr. Judge Levine. You don't have a Bible or, yeah. Oh, she bought one. Oh. The swearing in? Do we have the swearing in sheet?
I got a yearbook. We could.
Always exciting when I do the swearing.
Mm-hmm.
It's icebreakers.
Yeah.
All right, place your left hand on the Bible. Raise your right hand. I, Timothy McBain.
I, Timothy McBain,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support, obey, and defend
that I will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States of America
the Constitution of the United States of America
and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania,
and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania,
and that I will discharge the duties
and that I will discharge the duties
of my office with fidelity.
of my office with fidelity.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Tim. Thank you, Judge Levine. We put you right to work. Okay.
Okay, we do have a number of items this evening for work session. And the first is the room utilization study, and Dr. Holman, if you could lead us in some discussion coming out of the ECP committee regarding the room utilization study.
Good evening. As Dr. Dietrich referenced, the Education Community and Policy Committee had asked to have us look at the room utilization in the elementary schools in the district as a part of the ongoing conversation about full-day kindergarten and elementary class size. Dr. Santoro unfortunately was not able to be with us tonight. Dr. Santoro and Mr. Kennedy conducted a walkthrough of all of the schools in conjunction with the principals in order to take a look at the space available for classes and the current usage of those classrooms. So I'm going to first ask Mr. Kennedy to review the methodology that they used to examine the buildings, and then I'll go into some of the implications of what they found.
Okay, if you look at our spreadsheet, the first group of columns labeled rated capacity is basically looking at the building and how we're using the elementary schools. We only considered homerooms, not special rooms with art, music, and those type of rooms. So just looking at Bridal Path, there are 24 standard classrooms, and there are 2 kindergarten rooms. PDE uses 25 as an average number for plan-con process when you're building new schools, so I use 25 for those rooms. So there's 24 standard classrooms with 25 students per classroom, and 2 kindergarten rooms with 50 students per classroom, 25 in the morning, 25 in the afternoon. So the rated capacity of Bridal Path is 700. And that's an ideal situation that you have 25 students in every grade level, every classroom, and that's just not a reality, but technically that's what the building could hold. The next column, labeled functional capacity, Dr. Santoro and I looked how the building's being used. So we take the 24 standard classrooms at Bridal Path, 22 remain standard, and you go over to the third column, 2 are used for small group instruction. They can have anywhere from 8 to 12 students in those rooms. We then look at moving over, there are 26 total classrooms. Bridal Path's average class size is 21. And then we made an assumption of 10 students in the 2 small group rooms. We ended up with a functional capacity of 524. The reason that's lower than the rated capacity, again, we have some rooms that are used for only 8 or 10 students, and we don't have 25 in every section. We have 21 on an average across that building. Moving across, we included the actual enrollment of 514 at Bridal Path. And part of this process was really to determine, can we find enough classrooms potentially for full-day kindergarten? So Bridal Path, of the 2 small group rooms under the functional capacity section, we could free up 2 of those for full-day kindergarten. Those small group sections would have to be placed somewhere else in the building, and the principal would help locate those areas, and he has areas for those 2 rooms. Moving down the chart, you can see highlighted in yellow, Inglewood, we can only find 1, and there's a potential for 2, depending on the enrollment the year that you go to full-day kindergarten, if you go to full-day kindergarten. Knapp, there's not a room available. So you will either need 1 or 2 rooms at Knapp, and currently there are no rooms available for full-day kindergarten at Knapp. That's pretty much it.
Do you have any questions about the methodology that Mr. Kennedy and Dr. Santoro used before we get into looking at kind of the overall implications? No? Okay.
I do have one quick question, and I know you presented this to us, but point of clarification. When you were allowing 25 students per class, so you weren't working from the formula of the existing classes, right? You were working based on a 25. So you weren't saying at Bridal Path currently there's 26 classrooms. You were saying you were working based on 25 kids per class.
Correct, and that's a number that PD uses for the plan
Okay.
process.
The reason I was asking was because, for example, in the case of right now, if there's 3 sections in 2nd grade, but if you base it on 25 kids per class, maybe that would actually be allowing for, I'm wondering if we are allowing within this study room for a section to go up. That's what I'm wondering. Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yes, and I think what we were looking at was how many, on the average, how many classrooms could you use in what they were doing, correct?
So this doesn't tighten us so much that we can't allow for some increase in class?
That's what I'm going to show you next, is kind of what are the implications if you went the full-day kindergarten road, and what are the implications of the reducing class size road. Okay. But you're correct. It's Mr. Kennedy picked a number, which is the number that PlanCon uses, just for the purpose of saying that's how many students a room can hold. It could be less that are actually physically in the room. Could be more that are actually physically in the room. It's along the lines of thinking about when we are, I always say, if you want to buy soda, it comes in packs of 12 cans. A classroom is kind of the same way. Even if I'm only 3 over the guideline into the next section, I still have to buy a whole class. So this is just kind of a way of looking at how many classrooms are even available to be used versus how are you actually using them?
Yeah, I think the next slide or two
Yep.
will be more helpful than spending a lot of time thinking about that. I mean,
Right.
that's helpful to arrive at a gross number for functional
Correct.
capacity, but it's not
Right.
as helpful, I think, as the other slides
Correct.
we have here.
Correct. Okay, so if we want to switch to the next document? Nope, that's the one. Yep, thank you. So what we did first, and what we had done for ECP, was look at if we went to full-day kindergarten, what are the implications in terms of the number of rooms that we would need in addition to what we're already using. Remember, in a half-day model, an AM section and a PM section are sharing a room. So I only need 1 room for every 2 sections, not 1 room for every section. Many of our schools currently run 3 kindergarten sections. So that would equate to 2 classrooms, one of which is only used for half a day for kindergarten, okay? Now, just to go through the columns real quick, make sure that we're clear as to what we're looking at. The first 2 columns are showing you number of half-day sections and number of rooms used for those half-day sections currently this year. The 1920 projection study enrollment, if you remember last year, we had a 10-year long-range plan enrollment projection study completed by the Montgomery County Planning Commission. What we did, consistent with the other things we've been looking at for potential full-day kindergarten, is we pulled the projected enrollment for grade 1. And the reason we pulled the projected enrollment for grade 1 was figuring we generally go up about 12% or so from kindergarten to grade 1 because of students coming back from private kindergarten placements. So we said worst case scenario is that those kids all decide to come here in kindergarten rather than waiting until grade 1, okay? So those numbers are all based on that assumption that your projected grade 1 would also equal your projected kindergarten for that year, okay? Then we just simply applied our current class size guidelines, so it's important to understand we used current guidelines, which is a cap of 25 for kindergarten, to come up with the number of sections and number of rooms needed for 1920. And then the additional rooms needed is really the number of rooms you need in 1920, subtracting out the number of rooms we're currently have dedicated for kindergarten, okay? So you can see in every building you would need to add 1 to 2 classrooms in order to make it work. The one thing I will point out is when you look at the projected enrollment, you will see there are a bunch of schools where the projected enrollment is sitting between about 75 and 80. So that's that situation I was just describing where you're just barely over the line into needing the next section. Okay? So this is done as if that happens, you need to tip over into the 4th section. A lot of these projections, all you need is 3 or 4 less students, and you'd be at 3 sections instead of 4, okay, which again then would change your number of rooms that you need. So what we looked at was, if these were truly the number of rooms we needed, how many do the schools have the space for those additional classrooms based on what Mr. Kennedy was sharing in terms of calculating functional space? And because we generally have bathrooms present in kindergarten and most 1st grade classrooms, are there rooms that have the bathroom already in them? So what we found was, as Mr. Kennedy was sharing before, Inglewood and Knapp are the 2 schools where we would need to come up with a solution. Inglewood, if they only had to go up 1 section, would be fine. If they really have to go up 2, we don't currently have 2 rooms that we could repurpose for kindergarten. because we just don't have anywhere else to go with the things that are the classes that are currently taught in those rooms. NAP has no spaces available at all. So we would need to come up with a way to come up with 2 rooms in that building. The 3, Montgomery, North Wales, and Oak Park, they can come up with the rooms. They are not rooms with bathrooms. That's not necessarily a deal breaker. In North Wales and Oak Park, the kindergarten rooms are in very close proximity to a bathroom, so it's not like you've got to send the kindergarten kids to the other end of the hall to be able to go to the bathroom. It's right next door. Montgomery, I believe we said we would need to take a look at that.
Montgomery would be a small project to access rooms down the hall, run the plumbing and services to that room, but that would be a small project we have to deal with over the summer.
Okay. Some of the options that would be available to address Inglewood and Knapp, of course, can always look at some redistricting as an option. Of course, remembering that if you move students to another school, that has the potential to change the number of rooms that are available in that school. You have to look at that potential domino effect. Knapp, if Knapp is going to be the next school up for a renovation, you have the option there of putting in modular as a temporary solution, assuming township approval and all that sort of thing, and building into the renovation plan, adding space. That wouldn't solve your problem immediately, but it would solve your problem down the road as you did the construction. Okay?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I get it that this is what the numbers say.
Correct.
This is what the data shows.
Sure.
But I look at a spreadsheet like this and I look at Walton Farm where you're saying you need 2 more classrooms and that there's 2 classrooms that exist. And there's not 1 inch in Walton Farm available to put another student, so.
There is, because what you would need to do in many of these buildings, as Mr. Kennedy said, is you need to repurpose where some of these small groups are being taught. So sometimes small groups are assigned to a full classroom space when they could in fact be assigned to a smaller space. So in those cases, nobody has rooms sitting in their building that are vacant and have nothing in them. You know, it's kind of like at home with your closets. Stuff expands to fill the space available. But in a number of the schools, things could be shifted to a smaller space. And then that would free up the full classroom. That is how you would have to get to it if in fact you were going to reclaim that space.
So at Walton Farm this year, my understanding, either this year or last year, we now have the staff, they eat in a closet. Because they lost their room.
That's not.
These numbers.
Is that accurate, Scott?
Mr. Kennedy, maybe you can speak, this came up at ACP, and this may help with Mr. Diazio's question. And I was actually just going to commend you, because the process that you went through in visiting every single building, so maybe you could just speak to that, because I was going to commend you on that process of walking every single building. You and I think that he went around. You didn't just kind of get an email from the principals that said, here's what's in the building. You actually walked all of the buildings. So maybe you can just speak to the process, so that way we kind of know where that comes from. That might help us.
So you want to address Walton Farm, that particular question?
I just think speaking to your overall process of how you gathered this data, right? Because that's what we're trying to talk about.
We did. So if you look at let's sign up to the chart, but the functional capacity, again, the small group areas, they're full-size classrooms being used for anywhere from 8 to 12 students. That's what we focused on to try to find the kindergarten rooms.
You were not looking at faculty rooms, correct?
Not at faculty rooms, and not at the art, music, any of those rooms. We left those alone. Some of the schools, Nash has 8 large rooms used for small group instruction. That's a lot of potential space. Addressing Mr. Diazio's comments about Walton Farm, there are 3 full-size classrooms being used for small groups. We could split that room as one option and put 2 of the classes in there, and free us up 1 classroom for full-day kindergarten. So there's some creative ways to do that. I believe Mr. Gosling has another small area he can put students in. That's why he came up with those rooms.
But
it is crowded.
sometimes these rooms have a small number of kids in them because they're students with very specialized needs that they need more space.
Right. We did not, we only looked at moving students if in fact the feeling was that was going to be successful. So for instance, if we would have something like a special education room where we felt that the space was warranted, that was not put on the list as a room that could be repurposed.
Nor were the autistic rooms.
No.
We didn't touch any of those rooms. They're
No.
in certain schools.
So it could be something like ESL, and I'm just using an example. I don't know at Walton Farm the exact situation. ESL uses a full-size classroom, but they never have more than 4 students in there at the same time. Well, they don't necessarily need a full-size classroom to make that work. So if there's a smaller classroom, they could be shifted to a smaller classroom. Those were the kinds of shifts that were looked at, not shifts that would cause a reduction in programming.
I'm just concerned because when you say shifting to smaller areas, I know what that means in some of these schools. This means putting those kids in the atrium, out in the hallway. It doesn't work.
Not necessarily.
These are not revolutionary suggestions that they're making. As a special education teacher, it's often the case that classrooms are split, small classes work in small rooms. Flexibility is definitely an attribute of special education teachers and to make things work. And it sounds to me as though there was a process to make sure that we weren't putting students in a position to fail from a space standpoint, so.
Yeah, to follow up on that, after Dr. Santoro and I walked all of these rooms, we met with the principals and talked about which space would you move these small group sections. And every principal had an answer for those except for Knapp and Inglewood.
Right.
So they had spaces identified that they could do this in.
Yeah.
I don't want to take up any more time. I don't believe it. I've walked the building. I don't know. Have you
They
walked through
walked,
Walton
they
Farm?
walked the entire building.
There's
They
not,
walked,
there's not a single
Yes, I
classroom
have
in
walked
there.
through Walton Farm.
they walked the entire building and looked
I
at
don't
every
believe it.
space.
So that's fine. We can
yeah.
continue. I don't want to take up more time, but this,
Yeah.
I appreciate it, but I don't believe these numbers at all, quite frankly. So,
that chart represents what would be required if the enrollment projections actually come out that way, and if you maintain current class size guidelines. If you drop class size guidelines, that would likely increase, I can't promise, I have to run the numbers. It would likely increase the number of classrooms you would need. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind is one affects the other, okay? So the other chart that I have in there is because class size is something we've been talking about as well, I included, if you want to flip to that one, thank you. I included a chart where what I was looking at was for next year's enrollment, just to work with kind of a known quantity here. If you change the class size guidelines kind of systematically, not picking and choosing which grades kind of thing, what would be the net impact? Just to get a sense of how far do you have to actually drop the class size guidelines before you start creating a number of additional sections, okay? As we had talked at ECP, I think about 6 months ago about this a little bit, there are actually not a lot of class sizes right now that are really up within one of the cap. I think there's 11 in the whole district. So you have to actually drop the class size pretty significantly to start impacting the number of sections that you have in any significant way. So for instance, if you follow, the first set of columns is the sections and rooms that we currently have in each building, adding all grade levels together, not looking at grade by grade, okay? If you had no change to the current guidelines, you see what the projection is for next year. Just to, I love my color coding. Anything in green means you went down sections. Anything in yellow is up 1 section. Anything in pink is up 2 or more sections, okay? So that's just to give some kind of quick visual about what's the impact. So if you made no changes, there are actually a number of schools that will go down in sections for next year because the incoming kindergartens are so much smaller, which means the first grades are smaller, the second grades are smaller, and so forth. If you reduce all the guidelines by 1, the only one that actually net gains anything, let me say that. The only one that actually net goes up as compared to 17-18 would be Knapp. And if you go back to what we were just saying, Knapp has no space to go up sections, okay, to go up rooms, all right? If you go down by 2, now you see anything in white in those subsequent out columns means that it matches the 17-18, okay? So if you go down by 2, you only have 1 school that's still net down as compared to 17-18. You have 3 schools that are up 1 and 2 schools that are up more than 1. 2 of the schools that are up are Knapp and Inglewood, who don't have space to go up. And of course, this is assuming half-day kindergarten. This is not assuming full-day kindergarten, okay? And then if you go down by 3 across the board, you can see now you hit a lot of schools that create additional sections. All right? And then just in the last set, because we had kind of talked a little bit about primary grades versus intermediate grades, if you only dropped, I just arbitrarily picked by 2 because it was in the middle to not run, 3 more scenarios for you. If you went down by 2 in the intermediate grades, you can see again, there are 3 schools that would go up by 1 and 1 school that would go up by 2. And again, Inglewood can't go up by 2. So we just wanted to put this on the table because both increasing class size and adding full-day kindergarten require additional rooms. So you have to, it's good to have both pieces of information to start to think about what do we actually have space to house. I know sometimes the concept of art on a cart, music on a cart comes up. We have not historically done that here. When we have done renovations, we have built dedicated music rooms, dedicated art rooms that are designed for those subjects. If that's a direction, and I don't know that that's a direction you guys would want to go anyway, but if it's a direction you'd want to go, we actually have to do some level of deconversion of those rooms, correct? Yeah. We would actually have to do some amount of construction to convert those rooms back to regular classrooms, in addition to then losing the dedicated space that's designed for instruction of that subject. Okay, so we'd be happy to entertain any additional questions that you have.
Mr. Kennedy, from a design perspective, are there any elementary schools that could not house a mod? Like I'm thinking of the round building at Hatfield.
Yeah, address that. In terms of modulars, I forgot to say.
We have to look at the space. Each township is different as well. It's a lengthy approval process, 6 to 8 months probably to get a modular in place. The reason we mentioned it at NAP is we could tell the township that we are going to renovate there and add on, so it's easier to sell. And I haven't approached any townships yet to have that discussion, so it's really individual by each community. We have to look at that.
Right. Generally, temporary townships, I think, in general, tend to be more inclined to agree to temporary modulars than permanent modulars. So, and modulars really are not designed to be the permanent solution to a space problem.
No, and if you're
They're not?
I said not designed to be.
But you need to start that process in the fall for a modular to have it in place for September.
Right, I think we were saying you'd need to know by about October to guarantee that you could have a modular in by the following year.
Well, can you apply for a permit and then not use it? I mean, just to be safe, if we didn't need it?
I guess you can. There'd be some expense with that. There'd be some design fees and some time, small amount, but there'd be some cost to that.
Yeah, remember that when you put in a modular, do you want to just describe briefly what you have to do to implement a modular?
Well, there's also the site requirements, setbacks. You need to install the plumbing, sanitary lines, power, fire alarms, all those services from the main building to the modular. So you have to put together an engineering drawing of the site, where it's located, how you're going to provide all those services. The township has to approve that. So that's what takes 2, 3, 4 months just to go through that, and a month or so ahead of that to design that drawings to submit to the township.
Okay.
So I've seen townships require sprinklers in modulars. It's rare, but that's a possibility as well.
Have we ever done anything in terms of kind of that soft zoning where you would cap a school at a certain number and those students would then go to the next school? So 3rd grade at Bridal Path is full, and so those students then go to the next school that's open, that's closest to their home.
We did, yes. Most recently in Inglewood and York Avenue, particularly one particular year.
So we have that in place, like we already do, like
We
that's
have
something
done
we do.
that. We didn't find it necessary then again the year thereafter, but
Okay.
we did move some students that ended up going to North Wales. We had some other students that we moved to Nash Elementary.
Right, so it's more case by case.
It was. We had some presentations. We had some parents of Inglewood families that were with us and shared in those discussions, a number of committee meetings at ECP.
The other thing to remember is that you do incur additional busing costs likely to do that as well.
Thank you.
The only comment I would have, and it's really more just a suggestion for the board, as we're looking at this, we're looking, as Mr. Kennedy and Dr. Holman have said, we're looking at what our current boundaries are. We're looking at current attendance boundaries with our current schools and the current number of classrooms. My concern here is that when we talk about where people have identified that they could put a classroom, my understanding in talking with a few of the principals, and not all by any means, but a few of them, is that their understanding of that conversation was, if we absolutely had to, where could we make a classroom? And it's not an ideal scenario. And some of the scenarios do involve moving students to atriums, moving staff lunchrooms into closets, having the guidance counselor operate out of a closet. Those aren't scenarios that I think we should be proud of here as a board. And so whatever way we choose to move forward, I think we have to look at it comprehensively. We have parents here from Bridal Path right now where they've indicated that some of the classroom numbers are getting high. At Bridal Path, it's probably a great example of a school where we're fortunate enough that if we have to open up another classroom at a place like Bridal Path, we have the ability to do that because there are classrooms available at Bridal Path. When you go over to Walton Farm and you go over to Gwinnett Square, when we have to think about opening up another classroom, it's not just about cost for us over there. There's not a classroom to put students in those two buildings. I know it, I've been through them, I hear it from the parents, I hear it from the staff. So I get it that the principals and the building administrators have come up with plans that they think would work, but I'm just saying to us as a board, if we're moving forward with that, everyone needs to understand that those scenarios are kind of worst-case scenarios, and we're going to hear about it on the back end. And it's not, many of these scenarios involve environments that, quite frankly, I'm not convinced are conducive to learning. I think we need to take a much more global look at this. If we have to have a discussion about redistricting district-wide, I know it's generally not popular, but that's what we ought to do. That's my position.
I agree with that.
And I just hope that we consider that as a board.
Parents don't like that. It's a challenging job for the administration, too. Just bring in Dawn and
When was the last time that we did a district-wide?
2005.
2005?
For elementary, I don't know when the last time was.
And then we never did it for
secondary.
middle schools, right? Because
It was not done for the middle schools then, I don't believe.
Is there a common practice, length of time between redistricting?
I think it depends on the characteristics of the district and on how quickly the populations are shifting in the district. I don't know, I've never heard of I mean, honestly, I always felt like when I've done it, if you do a good job of it, it should last you at least 7 or 8 years, but a lot of that is really dependent on how much population shift you're seeing within your own district. Some of the areas like Nash and Montgomery and Bridal Path, you have populations that are aging out, but people aren't moving out with younger families moving in, so you're seeing these enrollment drops. You have other areas like Hatfield and Lansdale where you're seeing a significant population increase in that area. So it's not just a function of looking at the district as a whole, whether or not you're up or down in enrollment. It's also looking at where, in a district this size, with 6 different municipalities, how are the municipalities changing?
And just to clarify,
Yeah.
2005 was the last time we had what I would characterize
Right.
as a major redistricting.
Correct,
We did
correct.
redraw boundary lines.
Correct.
Culp was impacted, Hatfield was impacted, Oak Park was impacted, Knapp and Montgomery were more recently impacted, Inglewood,
Correct.
Gwinnett Square and Nash, all of those had some level of impact. North Wales, again, some impact. We moved some students from over here at Jefferson and some of those streets to North Wales. So there were other smaller scale redistricting done over the years.
Correct.
So I mean, all of this data is very helpful. I do think that there's no way we can make a decision tonight. Of course, we do want to segue into some strategic planning discussion because it all ties together. But certainly we have the Montgomery County Planning Commission study, which is very, very important because as we look ahead in our projections, I think we're going to be advantaged a bit in terms of the fact that, it's either flat or perhaps decreasing in some of those schools and especially the younger grades as we look ahead and what we anticipate will be incoming kindergarten, first grades, second grades in the next few years, but not in every one of them. But in many of them, we're either flat or going down just a little bit. So I think that'll help us regarding that. But that's important also. We also have to look at solutions. And as I think one of our parents said tonight, it's important that we talk about potential solutions. So what are potential solutions? One solution, of course, is to come up with more space, whether that's temporarily through modulars or it's through permanent construction. Although this can eventually be solved, it can't be solved quickly, though. In the case of NAP, it can be solved sooner rather than later because we do plan to do a project at NAP. So I think we have that benefit and we're able to work at NAP sooner rather than later. But in terms of long-term, you have options. You can add space in every school. You can add space in only a couple schools and do redistricting to account for that. You can do a reconfiguration of your grade patterns and say instead of K6, you're going to be K5, you're going to be 6-8, you're going to have, I don't know, a 9th grade center, and then a 10-12 building. I mean, there are different possibilities that are long-term solutions. Those don't happen quickly, though. They take time. But if the board sets some goals and says, you know, we need to point the administration in direction of, we'd like to have it all, if you will. We would like to have full-day kindergarten. We'd like to have substantially smaller class sizes. Then we have to present to you some of those possible solutions and how we might accomplish that. And again, knowing that some of those things do take some time, though. So I think that's very, very important. I think there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen, but we look forward to that discussion.
Thank you. Any more? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so can move on now to the strategic planning.
Yes, and given the hour, I don't think we'll, spend a lot of time on this right now, but I do think it's important that we, keep this in front of the board and the community. There is an attachment. I think the board has it there in terms of, the way the dot voting came out in terms of prioritization. Clearly, usage and renovation, a 10-year plan for our buildings and athletic fields received a lot of support. There's a lot of energy for working on student mental health and bullying identification, some prevention programs, behavior supports, that sort of thing. And kindergarten readiness strategies and full-day kindergarten did get a lot of board support. So we had, those three were clearly what I put in one tier there. And then we had quite a few things that were separated maybe by, 1, 2, or at most 3 votes in a grouping in the middle there. So when we talk about some long-range planning for funding, that had, significant board support. Increasing staff diversity did likewise. Redistricting, 10 votes on that. Greater continuum of special ed services, 10 votes on that. Class size reduction, 9. We're looking at some board policy and admin review. Again, we're talking about district diversity there in that committee. Organizational efficiencies, cost controls, culturally responsive, instructional strategies, community engagement of immigrant families. Some of those things tie together. Increased student achievement, career education, workforce readiness, and the improved evaluation system for those administrators evaluated by the board. And there's a bit of a break again then, and then there's some others that only got maybe 5 votes, 4 votes, or 3 votes. So I think we do need to have additional discussion, as a board and administration and leadership here as we move forward and we set the strategic plan for the coming years. But I did want to share this with everyone so that people are aware of, where those votes came out and where the energy is around the various initiatives in the district.
Thank you, Dr. Dietrich. Does anybody else have any questions or comments about the strategic plan?
Excuse me, just procedurally, are we able to put that up here, or is that internal?
I think you can display it, right?
Okay. So make sure anyone who's seeing this at home or in the audience is able to see this.
Is it in executive content or is there?
Oh, okay.
Okay. Is that where it is?
Okay.
Do you know how to do
Yeah, I
it?
wasn't sure if that was public or not.
Okay.
If any members of the public are interested in viewing it, they certainly can go on the board docs site and see it. Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Holman.
I do have a comment. On the third item down, kindergarten readiness strategies and full-day kindergarten.
Yes.
I gave the red dots to the full-day kindergarten.
Correct.
But the kindergarten readiness strategies, if those two were separated,
Correct.
I would have given 3 greens to kindergarten readiness.
I think you actually did, and we gave you credit for that. You put 3 right there, and then you put the reds next to the full-day kindergarten part.
I talked about it, I didn't think I did it.
I think you did.
No, then you would have counted it on full-day kindergarten.
No, we only counted it on the top, but we didn't count it on the.
Okay.
So we put it down in the bottom, and FullDay Kindergarten, 3 reds.
They knew what you were thinking, Tara.
Yeah.
They knew what you were thinking.
You were talking to us as you were
Yeah.
doing it. I
I
think you
was
put them there.
talking, I know I was talking about it.
All right.
That I remember, I don't remember what.
Because we've lumped kindergarten readiness and full-day kindergarten, which could be viewed as 2 different things, to kind of Terry's point, could we lump together increased staff diversity,
Yeah.
district diversity committee? And I don't know if, I think that was before we really knew about the cultural cadre and kind of looking at that. And then cultural responsiveness of instructional strategies and community engagement of immigrant families. Could we lump those
Yes, I
together
agree,
and
Julie.
I think so, that's a good idea.
maybe bump it up?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Maybe just discussion about all of these and then reevaluate the list.
I mean, it's
More
quarter to
red
10 now,
diamonds.
but.
Yeah, we're not having a discussion now.
But I totally understand what
Not
you're saying. I agree.
Okay, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
I thought that.
All right,
We're agreeing.
okay. So, no more questions then? Good. All right, moving on then to the 2018-19 budget, please, Mr. Scrocky.
So we had the proposed final budget approved at the May action meeting, and we're coming up on the final budget adoption next Thursday, June 21st. The proposed final budget had a 3.4% tax increase included, which utilized the Act 1 exceptions. So we just want to make sure as we move forward with the final budget adoption, as presented as the proposed final budget at 3.4%, that's still where the board is at. The reason for that is we need to start preparation of the tax bills to ensure they are in the hands of our property owners by July 1st. If there would be some level of change the night of June 21st, that would mean that tax bills would not be in the hands of the property owners by July 1st. So we just wanted to make sure that at this point in the budget approval process that the 3.4% that was included in the proposed final budget has support for the final budget adoption.
So do we have to take another vote, or we already voted on it last month?
Well, the proposed final was passed. There were some no votes, but it was passed at the 3.4%. So our plan was, based on that adoption, to move forward at final budget adoption.
Okay.
But if there is a change in the feeling of the board, it would be good to know that now. That way we could prepare the final budget adoption with a different number as opposed to changing it that evening.
So essentially, you would need 5 of us to say we want to change it?
Correct.
Okay.
I continue to believe that a 3.4% tax increase is out of line with our community and the current community standards. We heard last month that projected for next year, 1/3 of our students will be on free and reduced lunch. So that's 1/3 of our families that can't afford or struggle to pay for school meals every day. 1 in 3. I think that fact alone shows the changes in our community and that we need to balance the tax increase with the ability to pay of our community. Steve, do you have the numbers for the last couple of years of how close we've been to budget? So if you look at the 15-16 school year, how far ahead of budget were we in 15-16?
It'll take me a second to call that up. So we'll show I can't show it on the screen because that computer's hooked up somewhere else. But on the expenditure side, our budget variance over the past couple of years continues to shrink. And this is something that I mentioned during the budget process the last 7 months, that we're getting tighter and tighter both on the revenue side and the expenditure side. So I'll go back to 2009-10 as an example. There was a 6% variance that particular year. So that means that the actual expenses came in under the budgeted expenses by $12 million. It was a 6% variance. Contrast that with the 2016-17 year. The actual figures came in 0.73 under what the budget figure was. The year before that, in 15-16, it was 1.01%. The year before that, it was 2.32%. So you can see there's a downward trend over the last several years that we are getting closer and closer. Our actual numbers are getting closer to the budget figures. And that's excluding any fund transfers, capital reserve transfers. These are our numbers not counting the transfers. And on the revenue side, the same thing. In the 15-16 year, for example, we had a 1% variance. The year before that, 1.13%. variance. And so those variances are getting tighter and tighter. I know I mentioned in the past couple meetings for the upcoming year, our earned income tax, our budget figure is going to be the highest it's ever been. Our realty transfer tax figure is going to be the highest it's ever been. Our interest earning figure for the upcoming year is going to be the highest it's been in 10 years. So we're being less conservative, so to speak, on our revenue and expenditure side. So that budget variance continues to shrink year after year after year, which is a good thing. You don't want a large variance. We shoot for a 1% variance on either side of the equation each year. So at a $260 million budget, that means that if we come in $2.6 million at the end of the year under budget, that met our 1% variance threshold. Now, for the upcoming year, with a 2.4% tax increase, our imbalance would be $4.7 million before any fund balance would be used. And at 3.4%, the deficit would be $2.9 million.
And some of that deficit is proposed to come from the utilization fund, correct?
That's correct. About $1.9 million was planned to come from the retirement rate stabilization fund.
So what was our variance? What's our projected variance for 17-18?
For the current fiscal year, we're hovering right around 1% once again.
So that's 2.6?
Yep, on either side. Yep. So 2.6 under on expenses and roughly about the same figure on revenues as well.
So we're coming in over 5 million ahead of budget?
Right. We had the current fiscal year, we had a $4.5 million deficit that was approved initially. And we're planning at this point in time to come in somewhere in the neighborhood of about a $5 million positive variance, somewhere around there.
So we've
5 to 5.5.
just wrapped up 17-18 with a $5 million positive variance. What's our fund balance? We have $41 million
Correct, total.
in fund balance.
In various forms, yes.
And we're looking, the proposed final budget right now, the proposed increase taxes to the absolute maximum that the state law permits at 3.4%. The numbers just don't add up to me. You know, we just came in $5 million ahead of budget. The year before that, how much were we ahead of budget last year?
In the 16-17 year, we came in under budget on the expenditure side by $1.7 million, and we came in over budget on revenues due to the tax assessment appeal settlements of $7 million.
So we were close to $9 million ahead of budget the prior year. So if you look at the last 2 years, we've come in $14 million ahead of budget. We have $41 million in the bank. So how do you come in $14 million ahead of budget in the last 2 years, have $41 million in the bank, and then take it to your community and say, we need the maximum tax increase that's permitted by state law to fund our budget for next year? When you look at next year, the trends that I'm looking at are decreased student enrollment. So we're educating fewer kids next year than we are this year. So we should achieve cost savings in doing that. We're saving how much on medical insurance for next year?
Over $2 million due to the plan design changes.
Medical premiums are down over $2 million. I don't know how we justify to the community. How are we justifying the balance?
And I'd like to get some history as well, Mr. Diageo. I don't mean to cut you off, but if you're asking a question and looking for an answer, can I ask?
Yeah,
no,
I mean, it was
continue.
it's really a rhetorical question.
Okay.
But
Well, for some
please feel free to
context,
speak.
and then certainly I'd like to continue to have a conversation. But it's my understanding, Mr. Scrocchi, please either validate this or further clarify, that over the past few years in which we've been discussing that variance, these have been atypical events in our budget where we at least knew there was a likelihood, such as the tax assessment, or weren't there some other issues that also led to that?
Yeah, we've had some one-time events on the revenue side over the past couple of years now. Last year on the revenue side, the tax assessment appeal settlements was an anomaly. To come in $7 million better than budget on revenue side, that just won't happen again. We settled a large number of large tax assessment appeal cases initiated by the school district. So we not only brought in additional revenue to the school district, but we freed up escrow that was being held in a number of cases as well. So again, I think we're getting closer and closer to being at or under that 1% target moving forward. And in fact, if we exclude the tax assessment appeal settlements last year, we were right at that 1% target, both on revenue and expenses.
And to that end, Mr. Diazio, that is part of what informs at least my individual, not speaking for any of the other board members or their decision-making process, but I feel that we have one of the best financial analysts and administrators in the state. We made sure we renewed his contract because of his performance. And as a new board member, when I hear the history, base my decision on evidence, I am not willing to bet that we're going to get another bullet in the chamber, that we get lucky to take care of whatever deficit we have in the future. I believe why I am making a decision for this exception, very serious decision that I would prefer not to make, but I was elected to make a difference on this board by not making the same structural mistakes each year by making siloed decisions. And you're correct, that fund balance now is great. Mr. Scrocky, 5 years from now at 2.4%, what would our fund balance be?
Well, it depends on what initiatives the board moves forward with. I think that's a critical component here. And I know I mentioned at a previous meeting, I would ask the board and challenge the board to think about the budget in more than just a one-year cycle. So if you look at the 18-19 budget in isolation of anything else, I could easily agree with the argument that 3.4% just isn't needed. However, if you take a look at the long-term approach, which is why we do multi-year forecasts, we do 5-6-year forecasts. So depending on what initiatives are implemented by the school board, depending on the scenario, I'm showing some scenarios at the end of the 2023-24 year where there's no fund balance, or there's negative fund balance with a 2.4% increase. But that's all contingent upon, are we looking at major renovations at Knapp in the high school? Are we looking at full-day kindergarten? Are we looking at class size reduction? All those things come with a price tag. And I think it's really important to take a look at the long-term perspective. $41 million in fund balance is outstanding. That's one of the reasons, one of the primary reasons why we have the bond rating that we do. We talked about bond rating and how important that is. That's going to be really important if the school district borrows money moving forward, especially for a high school project. When you're looking at an astronomical number, to have that bond rating could save millions of dollars to the taxpayer. So $41 million is a great fund balance to have now, no question about it. But we're talking about a number of initiatives. We're talking about implementing some of the components in the proposed strategic plan. Again, those things come with the price tag. So looking at things from a multi-year perspective, that $41 million under a couple scenarios that I presented is gone in 5-6 years.
And lastly, and I'll yield at least for now after this statement, but I take it very seriously, any tax increase. We are having a robust discussion over a 1% variation. This isn't some major tax and spend initiative. It's a 1% difference that we as a board are discussing. For that 1%, I want to see that this is baked in going forward. Once again, we're dealing with a structural problem that over the years has existed. If over the last 5 years, I believe we did the calculations, if we average just 0.25% more, we would have had nearly $9 million in this budget this year. If we average 0.5% over the last 5 years, it'd be nearly $17 million, and we wouldn't be having some of these discussions. We wouldn't be raising taxes the way we are. I want to do this now to set things straight so that next year we have a minimal tax increase, and the year after even less, because we fixed the structural deficit and the problem we have now while delivering quality education and the facilities and world-class, school district that North Penn is. We need to maintain that. I don't think making a decision year to year is really going to be helpful. I think for those students who need it most, this is an investment in their future.
So but the 1% doesn't do anything long-term for the fund balance. So the dynamics, the spreadsheets that we're looking at, it tells the same story regardless of whether you have 2.4 or 3.4. And these scenarios, they assume a lot of assumptions that they're not inaccurate because they're assumptions, but they assume things like when we renovate the high school, we're going to, do a bond for the high school for 10 years. We would never do that. We're going to have to borrow for the high school. That's going to have to be a much longer term bond. So these scenarios, they're just scenarios.
I wanted to clarify.
These aren't projections.
I was talking about baked-in revenue over the years. I wasn't speaking strictly to the fund balance. Sure. Obviously, it's all connected, so I want to make sure that was clear.
And Mr. Giazzi, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were the one who pointed out to us that there's a structural problem in the budget from year to year.
When you look at, so last year, when you looked at the projected deficit, last year, it was much greater than 1%. If you take a look at our projected deficit for next year, and you assume that we're going to come in 1% ahead, our budget balances with 2.4, utilizing 1.7 from the rate stabilization fund. So as far as I'm concerned, there is no structural deficit, because given the assumptions that Mr. Scrocky tells us roughly, more or less, we can assume there is no deficit. That was not the case last year.
In a sense, there is a structural deficit, because the reason we're able to take the exceptions is because we're not able to fully properly fund our special education programs. We're taking from our general fund to do that, and we're doing that year over year. If it wasn't appropriate, the state would not grant us the ability to do it.
The ability to take or not, to have exceptions or not have them, is 100% based on our projections, whatever we make them. It has nothing to do with a review of prior history or anything like that. So if we change our assumption that we're going to collect 99% of our tax revenue, or the tax bills that go out, as opposed to 96, our budget's not going to show a deficit, and then we're not eligible for.
Well, Mr. Scrocky, are we?
Exceptions. The exceptions are, the ability to apply and be granted approval for the exceptions is strictly based on the assumptions that we present to PDE.
Right, in good faith. And we're speaking
Correct.
about reality-based.
Correct.
Exactly.
The special education exception is actually based on prior spending. Prior history has nothing to do with upcoming budget. And the same with retirement. It's all looking through the rearview mirror. None of it is based on projections. The
But they
exceptions
look at
are.
they look at your proposed spending for the year that you're budgeting for.
You have to show
Because-
you have to show a deficit. That's correct. You have to show a deficit, but the actual exception itself is based on past historical information. It's a formula. We apply for exceptions. The state has all the data. I'm not quite sure why we actually do the application process, because it's based on annual financial report data that's available at the state. So we're just repopulating information that's already available. So the exceptions themselves are based on historical data.
And Mr. Scrocky, even with the exception, will North Penn still be the 5th lowest school district in Montgomery County for taxes out of 21?
We would. We're actually, right now, we're the 5th lowest out of 21, and our millage rate is 24% below the county average. The county average for the millage rate is 30.6, and we are at 24.67. So we are 24% below the countywide average right now. So, yeah, we are far below the 6th lowest school district in the county. So the 5th, it puts us in the first quartile, the lowest quartile in millage rates in the county. That's certainly an enviable position to be in.
And we're able to do that because of our strong commercial tax base here. So when you look at the school districts that have a lower millage, for example, I haven't seen the list, but I would guess that is Upper Marion on that list? Is Upper Marion?
Upper Marion and Wissahickon battle it out each year, who's the lowest, who's the second lowest.
Okay, so when you think of Upper Marion, you think, okay, well, what's in Upper Marion that they can have a tax rate that's so low? They have them all in Upper Marion. Colonial School District is probably a school district that is on the lower end. Why is that? Because they have them all. We're fortunate here in North Penn, we have them all, we have a strong commercial base, and that's why the millage rate is the way it is. It's not necessarily because we are underfunding our education compared to any other school districts. So I just want to make sure that's clear.
So, I mean, in terms of where we're heading here on June 12th and then June 21st, I think the purpose of the discussion tonight, work session, was to see, is there any, consensus to change what was directed in the budget that we adopted preliminarily in May, or is there not? With the mindset that the goal is to get those tax duplicates out in the mailboxes on July 1st. So if there's, the consensus to proceed with the same numbers that were presented in the preliminary budget, that's what you will see. Certainly, there's no vote tonight, and there will be a vote next week. That could change. You run the risk then that you wouldn't have those tax duplicates out there on July 1st. But understanding that, people will have to vote the way they believe is appropriate next week when we have the actual vote. So unless there's anything different at this juncture, my sense is that we would proceed with the preliminary budget. But that was the purpose for tonight. Is there a consensus that we should be preparing for something different, or go with what we were given direction in the preliminary budget.
So are you open to a motion to remove the exception?
Anything is possible. We're just looking for some direction tonight. It's a work session. It isn't really the actual budget vote will happen a week from Thursday.
I mean, as far as planning or whatever, for direction to change it or not change it.
Yeah, I mean, that's really up to the president and how she wants to kind of get consensus here, but, you know, if you want to do it differently, you can see where the votes are, that's fine.
Did you want to make a motion, Terry?
It's really up to you how you guys want to run it.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think one point to clarify, Mr. Fusco had said earlier about anyone changing their mind from the prior vote. My understanding, and Mr. Scrocky can correct me, was that it was a 5-3 vote in terms of approving the proposed final budget.
Yes, that's correct.
So in terms of just everyone's individual position on the issue, I think part of the question was, would any of those 5 who had voted affirmatively to approve the budget likely change their position as a result of further discussions? We obviously have one new board member who was not did not participate in the vote. It was, I believe, 8 board members voted.
This is the first time I think we've had the benefit of having both the budget and strategic plan together. And I think that this is not so much for me wanting to change my vote regarding the budget, but really us looking at the strategic plan. And so if we are going to, and I want to acknowledge Mr. Diazio's comment about the burden. I think we've all been very concerned about the burden. That burden and those populations that we would be burdening with this tax increase are not represented on our strategic plan. So there are some, and then also I think we've talked about taking the exceptions for special ed. Special ed is not specific to our plan. So I think that we've done this plan when we were kind of newer to the board and our role in being kind of guiders of policy and budget, and I think having some of that to realign with that there's some mismatches to me. There is some things that aren't lining up that maybe we would like to take some time at another meeting at another time to help those to realign.
I'm absolutely open to that. I think that's a good point. As we progress, and we should be adaptable and open to that. I think that's a good thing to point out.
Okay. So did you want to make a motion, or are we just moving on?
My sense, after what Kyle said, is more than likely we will not get the yays to go lower. If I took a consensus, is that? All right.
Okay. All right, then.
Yes.
So then we'll just move on.
So I think it's useless to do it?
Okay. Then I guess we'll just move on now to the next audience of citizens, if anybody, the audience has shrunk. Okay. It's a late hour. Joe, did you want to make a comment? Okay, good. All right. All right, then. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
I'm sorry, who seconded? Motion? Oh, okay. Motion by Mrs. Perkowski, seconded by Mr. Fusco. All right, thank you.